Tom and Jack for Cultaholic. Let's do away with the pleasantries. You've seen the headline. Let's get into the story. Jack, what's going on?
Well, according to Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful, Daniel Bryan's contract expired after his match with Roman on SmackDown last week. So apparently, if this is accurate, Daniel Bryan is officially a free agent in the world of wrestling.
Bryan is done with WWE, apparently. So this comes from the report from Fightful via Sean Ross Sapp. Fightful has spoken with sources both inside and outside of WWE that have indicated Daniel Bryan's WWE contract either expired or was set to expire last week after his SmackDown match, the one where he was banished from WWE. And I kind of thought this was going to open the door to maybe, what's the American Dragon doing here? Who's this rookie Bryan Bryanson? Like, apparently not the case at all. Sean Ross Sapp goes on to say, high-level sources both outside and inside have noted they'd heard of the expiration of the deal, but that Bryan had not spoken openly about his contract status that they're aware of. We also hadn't heard of any particular farewells backstage, as if he wasn't going to be around, although that doesn't mean they didn't happen privately. Since this has come out, Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer has said that WWE, you'll be surprised to hear, is pushing really hard for Daniel Bryan to re-sign with the company. And whether or not he will, that's up to them. But we have had this conversation before. I think was it last year? It might have even been you and I that sat here, Jack, when Brock Lesnar became a free agent.
I thought you were going to say Drew Gulak, because a similar situation happened with Drew Gulak where his contract expired, but then he re-signed anyway. So it was kind of a story at first when everyone went, Gulak's contract's expired, that must mean he's going to Impact or AEW, but instead he did just re-sign with WWE. Now, I don't know if Bryan's likely to or not, because he's been talking recently, hasn't he, about kind of hinting at losing maybe his passion for wrestling a little bit. He said that the main event of WrestleMania felt weird to him. And he didn't really feel like he was there in the moment. I think he said something along those lines, didn't he?
He said that he felt out of body for a lot of it. Yeah. And he did an interview 9 days after the show and said, I still haven't watched the wrestling match back. Normally by that point, he probably would have watched it back to see what happened. And he just was very, as you say, removed from it all. It was also a storyline that he didn't want to be in. He had quite openly said that the WrestleMania main event should have just been Roman Reigns versus Edge. He felt like that was a strong enough match to happen and lobbied to get himself out of the WrestleMania main event. So you mentioned like the Drew Gulak thing, and also I think there's maybe one of the very few occasions that Brock Lesnar and Drew Gulak get mixed up. But with the Brock Lesnar one, he became a free agent. He ended up re-signing. He's gone again. He's probably coming back at some point. The Drew Gulak one, that very much felt like it's something that out of nothing, and then it's got re-signed. But Daniel Bryan, because as you say there, Jack, he has really have this. It seems like he's fallen out of love, not so much with wrestling, because in interviews he's talked about wanting to do stuff for CMLL and wanting to do a little bit more in the wrestling world before he goes. Certainly not work a full-time schedule anywhere, but it feels like he's fallen out of love with the WWE way of things.
Yeah, potentially. It's perhaps that, yeah. I remember, it was a few years ago now, but I did a phone interview with Bryan. And he said something in that interview, kind of unprompted. I don't think I'd asked him a question that led into it. I basically said, I think, like, what else is there for you to achieve, Daniel Bryan? And he said that he had this weird, like, desire or compulsion. And he knew it was something that was impossible, but he wanted to have the perfect wrestling match. And I thought it was quite a lovely answer, like the fact that he's just, like, so dedicated to his art and everything that he wants to create the perfect match. But it could well be argued that in the current framework that he finds himself in the main roster of WWE, maybe they don't have the style of matches that would allow him to maybe pursue that any further. It's just a total speculation on my part, though. So
the only place probably within WWE where you could come close to doing that would be NXT.
Yeah.
Absolutely. A few people had suggested that maybe the banishment of SmackDown might lead him to do a short tour of NXT, a la Finn Balor, which would be a wonderful thing. I feel like NXT is sort of the place where people go to remind themselves, to rekindle that passion. NXT is kind of basically the wrestling version of a couple's retreat. Yes. Like, you will go there if you're in WWE to kind of remind yourself how much you love it, and then, hopefully when you go back, things are even again. Finn Balor's been doing amazing stuff there for a similar reason. We've seen teams like Brazongo have a resurgence there as well. Daniel Bryan at NXT would have been a great one, and who knows, should he re-sign? If he does re-sign, it may involve a tour of NXT. We will address the Tony Khan-shaped elephant in the room, that with a contract expiry like this, as the contract has expired, there tends to not be a 90-day no-compete. There tends to, historically, be a case of once that expires, then off you go. We've seen people's contract expires, and then a couple of days, sometimes mere hours later, they're on the phone or they're on a jet somewhere else. Blood and guts tonight.
I don't know. I'm not going to get involved with that, Tom.
Throwing it out there. I mean, everyone else is going to talk about it. I'm just throwing it out there.
A short trip across Florida, isn't it? Really, but no. I don't know. I feel like I don't know why, but just my gut kind of says that
your blood and gut.
My blood and gut says that Bryan probably wouldn't go to AEW at this stage of his career. I don't know if that's got anything to do with perhaps the quote that we have here, where he's been very open about the state of his health recently. He mentioned in a recent TV Line interview that as far as his wrestling future goes, he's not actually sure how much action he'd be willing to commit to because of his physical state and the history that he's had with injuries that we all know about. So, I don't know, because if he were to go somewhere else that was more traditionally work rate heavy, you have to imagine that those sort of places would be putting his body more at risk, or putting it under more stress, I suppose. It's a strange one to work out what he's going to do here.
He's gone back and forth on a few things in different interviews. In some interviews, like he said, he like you said there, he's talked about the stress on his body and wanting to sort of wind up his career now. But he's also talked about wanting to wrestle on a CMLL show.
Yeah,
he's been very he's kept us guessing. Like, he's both said, I don't want to wrestle much anymore, and also, I want to wrestle everywhere now, please. So I don't think he quite knows. I feel like maybe time away from WWE, maybe time off that schedule may help him make a decision on what he does next. I mean, what would you like him to do, Jack, at this point?
I really don't know. I'd just like to see him wrestle, even if it is through re-signing with WWE. I'd just like to see him wrestle somewhere that gives him fresh matchups and creative opportunities to excel, because he's one of the best ever, and he'll go down as one of the best ever, and it's always just an absolute pleasure to see him not only wrestle, but take part in inventive storylines and that sort of thing. I disagree with him when he says that he shouldn't have been part of that WrestleMania build. I thought he really enhanced it. Bringing a bit of a different angle to it. There were all kinds of shades of grey with the characters going on, and I really enjoyed him as part of it as well. I agree with him not winning it, but I think that it was still really good. I don't know, maybe another thought I've just had there is that maybe, because wasn't he supposed to be quite involved creatively with SmackDown recently?
There was a lot of conversation about him helping people along and bringing people up. He was doing stuff with Drew Gulak, or was it Brock Lesnar? Definitely Drew Gulak. He was doing stuff with Drew Gulak to sort of bring him along. There was a couple of matches that he had with some guys lower in the card that he wanted to try and push along. So he has done stuff creatively, but maybe that's just not enough for him. Maybe he's not getting that. Maybe it's not the role that he wants to play. Maybe it's a case of wanting just to step away completely. Maybe his passion does lie indeed with doing something completely non-WWE. Maybe. He's been wrestling for a long time now. But then, as we all know, wrestling seems to get a hold of people, particularly those who are very good at it. So you never know. You never know what he's going to do, really. Absolutely not. So the big story this morning, Daniel Bryan's WWE contract has expired. He is a free agent, and we will keep you up to speed on this rolling story at cultaholic.com. We'll be back for more news later on. Stay safe and love you. Bye.